Hi again, we're going to deal with reabsorption in the loop of Henle to start with. So the loop of Henle, remember that's that big loop that dips down in the nephron. So we assume that you have a working knowledge of the following. So we've discussed all these so far. What's happening in the proximal convoluted tubule was the last video. These definitions, if you have the PowerPoint open, you can link to all these definitions. So we're dealing with a juxtamedullary nephron here. Okay, juxtamedullary. So this is the one with a really long loop of Henle that goes down into the medulla and is surrounded by the vasorector blood vessels. So it looks like this. It's only responsible for 15% of the water reabsorption. But it adjusts the volume of water in the filtrate, and it adjusts the amount of solutes in it as well. It uses something called a countercurrent system that creates a hyperosmotic medullary interstitial fluid, establishing an osmotic gradient between the filtrate in the loop and the interstitial fluid in the medulla. Isn't that good? What does it mean? What does it mean? Okay, countercurrent. Roads are countercurrent. You've got one lane going that way and the other lane of cars coming that way. They're countercurrent. They're going in the opposite directions. So something about the going down and going up affects what's going on. So the stuff going down the descending limb of the loop of Henle is affected by the stuff going up the ascending limb. And we'll see how. So the countercurrent system creates a hyperosmotic medullary interstitial fluid. Well, the medullary interstitial fluid is essentially the fluid between the cells around in the medulla, okay, around the loop of Henle. So something makes that hyperosmotic, very concentrated. So you might be thinking here, oh, that rings a bell from the stuff we've been talking about already. If you have a hyperosmotic surrounding, then water is drawn to it by osmosis. Water is drawn out of the filtrate through the wall of the descending loop of Henle into the surrounding fluid to try and even up the concentrations. Okay, wow, that's very important. And it occurs in the juxtamedullary nephrons, 15%, like I said. And these vasorector capillaries absorb the water and solutes, and they take them away. So if your water's coming out and diluting the stuff around it, but it's then taken away in the blood, then it's still concentrated around the descending limb and water will be drawn out of it. So we'll see that as we go through here. It's a dynamic process. It's always very important to think of this as something that continues to happen. Like we talked about with the heart, blood's always going through it. Like we talked about with the lungs, blood is always going through the lungs and air is always coming in and out of the lungs. And if it wasn't, you wouldn't have the gradients for stuff to go down and move. Okay, so here we have the filtrate flows in opposite directions. So the filtrate's coming down the descending limb and up the ascending limb. Okay, that's countercurrent. That's all countercurrent means. One's going one way, the other's going the other way. Okay, and they're very close to each other. There's a million of them in each kidney, so they're very close to each other. All right, so the long nephron loops of the juxtamedullary, this is what it is. And it creates a gradient. How does it create a gradient? Well, annoyingly, it's the ascending side where you think something would happen on here, but everything happens, the cause of everything that happens is on this side. It's on the ascending limb. We pump out sodium chloride, which makes the interstitial fluid, and I do wish they pointed it in this direction as well, but this comes out all around this tubule, and it makes it concentrated all around this tubule. You pump out sodium here, but water can't get back in here. So it's, and this side, whoops, water is drawn out of here, but salt can't get in there. So we pump salt out here, and it makes a whole area hyperosmotic, and water is drawn out of here by osmosis, and it tries to dilute the interstitial fluid. But as it does so, it's carried away in the blood in the vasorector. So the proximity of the two tubules allows them to affect each other. So that one going up affects this one coming down. The active pumping, so we use energy to pump sodium chloride, salt, drives the countercurrent system because water is reabsorbed over here because of osmosis, because this interstitial fluid, which is essentially all this white stuff here, has been made hyperosmotic, concentrated, because of the sodium chloride that's been pumped out into it. So by osmosis, because it's more concentrated here than here, and your solute can't get back in, your NaCl can't get back in, the water comes out, and then it gets reabsorbed into the blood. Okay, it's a positive feedback cycle, and we'll see that in a second. So we start here. Salt's pumped out of this ascending limb. Makes the interstitial fluid get more concentrated. The osmolality increases in this whole area here. Not just here, not just on this side. It's coming out all the way up there, all the way across here, and it's affecting all of this area. Water then leaves the descending limb. So the descending limb gets more and more concentrated as more and more water is removed. And the osmolality of the filtrate goes up. That means it gets more concentrated. And the highest osmolality, the highest concentration of the filtrate, is here at the bottom of the loop of Henle. It's just here at the bottom. And then we start pumping salt out. So by the time we get to the top of the loop of Henle here, the ascending limb, we have pumped out water and we pumped out salt. So we reduced the volume and the salt concentration. So this slide here is talking about osmolality. So anywhere that's equal in number is equal in concentration. And so if they're equal in concentration, you're not going to get any net movement. It's only going to get net movement of either water or solute when there's a concentration gradient. Remember that? So we're equal here. So the concentration of the fluid leaving the blood is the same as that in the blood, and all the way through the proximal convoluted tubule, it remains relatively constant. Because of this, and that one should be red, that's Pearson's made that mistake because it's sodium chloride there. So all this sodium chloride being pumped out makes the interstitial fluid more concentrated. And because the sodium chloride can't get into the descending limb, water is drawn out by osmosis and then taken away in the blood. So that's reabsorption of water. The concentration increases all the time that we go down the descending limb because we're taking more and more and more water out and leaving the sodium chloride in there. So it gets very concentrated, and it's the most concentrated at the bottom of the loop. And then as we turn the corner, we start pumping out that sodium chloride. So we're getting rid of it because it drives this side of things, and it all gets reabsorbed into the blood. And the filtrate is its most dilute as it leaves the ascending limb. You can see that that's 300 milliosmoles. It's only 100 milliosmoles afterwards. So you reabsorbed a lot of the stuff. And the effect of the countercurrent mechanism is to reabsorb large amounts of water on this side and large amounts of solutes on this side. Okay, and to transport them back into the blood in the vasorector. So that's reabsorption. Okay, as the water and the solutes are reabsorbed, the loop first concentrates the filtrate and then dilutes it as it's going back up. Okay, mechanism of the reabsorption of the loop of Henle. We've seen this before. Water in the descending limb is reabsorbed by osmosis. The water leaves the limb because the osmolarity of the concentration of the interstitial fluid has been increased because the sodium chloride has been added to it. Okay, and it's pumped out of the ascending limb through integral protein symporters. Remember integral proteins? They go all the way through the cell membrane. And as the filtrate moves down the descending loop or limb, the descending limb, the osmotic gradient is maintained by continuing the release of sodium chloride. So you're maintaining this gradient, even though water's leaving all the time. More and more sodium chloride's being pumped out as well. So the gradient is maintained, and water continues to leave until it reaches the highest concentration at the bottom of the loop, which is 1200 milliosmoles. Okay. So the vasorector is the network of blood vessels which carry that carry the reabsorbed substances away to the general circulation. And they do this without undoing the osmotic gradient, because basically as they continue to take the solutes away, they continually be replaced by the actions of the loop of Henle. And this is the vasorector again, and it's showing how stuff can enter it. This is not the loop of Henle, so I don't want you to get too hung up on this slide, because it's very easy to think, oh, this is the loop of Henle, but it's the vasorector around the loop of Henle, so I'm not going to dwell on this. Okay, so reabsorption loop of Henle summary. The descending limb of the loop of Henle is permeable to water, but not to solutes, dissolved substances. The ascending limb is not permeable to water, but solutes are pumped out. The increase in the solutes in the interstitial fluid, that's the fluid around everything, causes the osmolarity to be increased. It gets concentrated. Okay, and that draws the water out of the descending limb by osmosis. The loss of water from the filtrate causes the solute to become more concentrated in the descending limb, and increases more, and thus more pumping occurs. And this causes osmolarity of the interstitial fluid to become elevated and draws more water out. So it all sort of feeds off each other. I think that is an animation that sadly does not happen anymore. No. All right, so I'll just go over reabsorption in the distal convoluted tubule and the collecting duct. Actually, I will do that next, so we'll finish here for this video.